Hello, online pipe community. Ethan, Parsimonious Piper. And once again, this week I am joined by,
Butter Piper.
and we are going to get into Screwtape letter number 23. I'm reading this week, so let me dive right in. My dear Wormwood, through this girl and her disgusting family, the patient is now getting to know more Christians every day, and very intelligent Christians, too. For a long time, it will be quite impossible to remove spirituality from his life. Very well, then, we must corrupt it. No doubt you have often practiced transforming yourself into an angel of light as a parade ground exercise. Now's the time to do it in the face of the enemy. The world and the flesh have failed us. A third power remains, and success of this third kind is the most glorious of all. A spoiled saint, a Pharisee, an inquisitor, or a magician makes better sport in hell than a mere common tyrant or debauchee. Looking around your patient's new friends, I find that the best point of attack would be the borderline between theology and politics. Several of his new friends are very much alive to the social implications of their religion. That in itself is a bad thing, but good can be made out of it. You will find that a good many Christian political writers think that Christianity began going wrong and departing from the doctrine of its founder at a very early stage. Now, this idea must be used by us to encourage once again the conception of a historical Jesus to be found by clearing away later accretions and perversions, and then to be contrasted with the whole Christian tradition. In the last generation, we promoted the construction of such a historical Jesus on liberal and humanitarian lines. We are now putting forward a new historical Jesus on Marxian, catastrophic, and revolutionary lines. The advantages of these constructions, which we tend to change every 30 years or so, are manifold. In the first place, they all tend to direct men's devotion to something which does not exist. For each historical Jesus is unhistorical. The documents say what they say and cannot be added to. Each new historical Jesus, therefore, has to be got out of them by suppression at one point and exaggeration at another. And by that sort of guessing, brilliant is the adjective we teach humans to apply to it, on which no one would risk 10 shillings in ordinary life, but which is enough to produce a crop of new Napoleons, new Shakespeares, and new Swifts in every publisher's autumn list. In the second place, all such constructions place the importance of their historical Jesus in some peculiar theory he is supposed to have promulgated. He has to be a great man in the modern sense of the word, one standing at the terminus of some centrifugal and unbalanced line of thought, a crank vending a panacea. We thus distract men's minds from who he is and what he did. We first make him solely a teacher, and then conceal the very substantial agreement between his teachings and those of all other great moral teachers. For humans must not be allowed to notice that all great moralists are sent by the enemy, not to inform men, but to remind them, to restate the primeval moral platitudes against our continual concealment of them. We make the sophists, he raises up a Socrates to answer them. Our third aim is, by these constructions, to destroy the devotional life. For the real presence of the enemy, otherwise experienced by men in prayer and sacrament, we substitute a mere probable, remote, shadowy, and uncouth figure, one who spoke a strange language and died a long time ago. Such an object cannot, in fact, be worshipped. Instead of the creator adored by its creature, you soon have merely a leader acclaimed by a partisan, and finally, a distinguished character approved by a judicious historian. And fourthly, besides being unhistorical in the Jesus it depicts, religion of this kind is false to history in another sense. No nations and few individuals are really brought into the enemy's camp by the historical study of the biography of Jesus, simply as biography. Indeed, materials for a full biography have been withheld from men. The earliest converts were converted by a single historical fact, the resurrection, and a single theological doctrine, the redemption. Operating on a sense of sin, which they already had, and sin not against some new fancy dress law produced as a novelty by a great man, but against the old, platitudinous universal moral law, which they had been taught by their nurses and mothers. The Gospels come later and were written not to make Christians, but to edify Christians already made. The historical Jesus, then, however dangerous he may seem to be us at some particular point, is always to be encouraged. About the general connection between Christianity and politics, our position is more delicate. Certainly, we do not want men to allow their Christianity to flow over into their political life, for the establishment of anything like a really just society would be a major disaster. On the other hand, we do want, and want very much, to make men treat Christianity as a means, preferably, of course, as a means to their own advancement, but failing that, as a means to anything, even to social justice. The thing to do is to get a man at first to value social justice as a thing which the enemy demands, and then work him on to the stage at which he values Christianity because it may produce social justice. For the enemy will not be used as a convenience. Men or nations who think they can revive the faith in order to make a good society might just as well think they can use the stairs of heaven as a shortcut to the nearest chemist shop. Fortunately, it is quite easy to coax humans round this little corner. Only today I have found a passage in a Christian writer where he recommends his own version of Christianity on the ground that only such a faith can outlast the death of old cultures and the birth of new civilizations. You see the little rift? Believe this, not because it is true, but for some other reason. That's the game. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape.
Wormwood is losing his patient, and Screwtape is pointing it out. And he's losing him to this religion of Christianity, and the worst part of it is he's believing it. Faith. And this girl, and as Screwtape says, this disgusting family who truly believes in the person of Christ, the resurrection, and how he's redeemed us. And so now Screwtape has to teach Wormwood something a little more subtle. And this letter, I'm going to say, especially to everyone who's following and has been following, I find this letter to be kind of a little, he's been transitioning, Lewis has, from the patient who's been moving from sin to sin, and how does Screwtape and Wormwood use that. He's now been transitioning to a believer, to someone who truly believes in the faith and is being surrounded by people who do. So he's moving from a man going from sin to sin, from someone who desires to move from good to better, purging their self, and truly coming into a deeper relationship with the person of Christ. So now Screwtape has to tell Wormwood, we have to take a different tactic. And now we have to use the good of his faith, the good of Christianity, and now how do we corrupt it? And those who've been following, I'll say it for myself first, this letter can be a little more challenging because it works on the subtlety and it really works on the nuances of how does the evil one, how does Screwtape and Wormwood, how do they take something that is good and now they want to pervert it? Now they want to corrupt it. I really see this letter as moving to a deeper understanding of the spiritual life, and or how the evil one's trying to pull us away, where he speaks of, and I think this is so apt for today, whether it's politics or theology, how does he take the good we desire, social justice, and I might get the decades wrong, but the 70s, there was liberation theology, maybe it was before that. and so forth, especially in South America. And the little that I know is, here you have a persecuted people, and I know through a little bit of my uh, readings is there started to be a challenge amongst clergy because some clergy were saying we are going to take up arms in the name of Christ, and that's where it became the problem, I think, where Christianity became a means to a social end. And the subtle aspect of this is the fact that, you know, if you are a believer, if you have a faith in Christ and a friendship with him, and you want to live that way, then we're told that you're going to clothe the naked, feed the poor. So it follows from that. Screwtape wants to pervert that and say, let's take Christianity, the means to that social end, in that if we can accomplish that social end of justice, then the world will be great. Not because of who Christ is, but because it becomes to a mean to that end. And we can we can see it in our politics. It can be a rabbit hole to go down, but not that that's my desire. But especially in America, as we're coming upon our election, and a big one is, if I get, both sides, I think you could say this, if we just get the right presidential candidate in there, then we'll be saved. Everything will be great. And not that, and the perversion of this is, we do want the right person to help us to have our freedoms. How does Screwtape want to pervert that good? And that's I think where I'll leave this. My beginning part is with people is to think about the good that we desire to do as a person, our local church, within our own country. Screwtape does not want the good that we want to do and be because of our relationship with Christ. So he wants to pervert that good and corrupt it. And Lewis is really pointing out, this is how he's going to start. This is how he's going to do it. And so, Ethan, I know you definitely got you got a lot to add on this. So I'll ping pong it back.
Well, continuing in the vein that you ended on with the corruption that they're talking about with using Christianity and politics, and perverting the two together. Like you said, we see it on both sides of the political spectrum in the U.S. On one side, you have churches that clamor strictly for what we have now called, with capital letters, social justice, and on the other, you have those who would use Christianity as a means of enforcing some sort of morality code, and both of those are wrong. Screwtape points out that one of the things, and this is such a common theme in these letters, so many great different examples of distraction. These things are a distraction away from the real purpose of Christians and the church. And he discusses this historical Jesus, which is it's a prime example of a distraction, because instead of focusing on what we do know that Jesus said and did, we focus on speculation about what modern causes would Jesus support, what things that I value would he be just right on board with, and let's use that as a bludgeon to force my political views out there. And like you said, both sides do it, and it's a distraction. And Screwtape very specifically says, this is a distraction away from who Christ is, who he was, and what he did. Well, he is God. We lose that when we start to make miniature messiahs out of our presidential candidates or parliamentary, the whatever your form of government is, when you start to make many messiahs out of your political leaders, you've taken your focus off the Messiah, and we lose the focus on what he did, which was live a perfect life, die for us, and resurrect. And so this distraction away from the true Jesus to this quote unquote historical Jesus sends us down rabbit holes, as you mentioned, that take us further and further away from the truth. And the truth is that we're all quite aware, and this goes back to some of his discussion in Mere Christianity, the universal moral law. We're aware of it. We've been taught it since we were children, and this is across all cultures. We know that we've broken that moral law, so we know, in fact, that we're sinners. When we're presented with the death and resurrection of Christ as a means to heal that the gap that sin causes between us and our Creator, that redemption, that justification, uh, we get distracted away from that, and instead we use the good things about Christianity as a cudgel, when in fact the purpose of us as Christians and as a church together should be to fulfill the Great Commission, which is to make disciples. And when we do that properly, we and the other disciples around us are going to fulfill those feeding the hungry, taking care of the widows and orphans. We're going to do those without using government or politics as our cudgel. And so the focus should be on the person of Christ, and instead we get distracted into all of these. Like I said, which ones of my causes would he support, and let's go out and make everybody else conform to to what I think Jesus would do.
I was just remembering how I was in a church. I was a pastor in a church, and it was a decent size. And um, I wanted to relook at the mission statements that the parish had, and the church, and some of the local groups. And one of them was the food pantry. It was well-run food pantry. Yeah, it was well run. They really did a great job. And I sat down with a couple of the leaders, and I looked at their mission statement. This is a church food pantry. The mission statement of their food pantry did not mention the person of Jesus. And I pointed that out to them, and I said, you say nice things in here, but you don't mention why you do this, that it's because of Christ. And so what they ended up doing is they just inserted his name within the mission statement. And I was starting to realize I had to be careful because they weren't getting it. But I said to them, I said, I think you need to rewrite the whole mission statement with that understanding that it comes from our faith in Christ. And what brings that to mind is we've mentioned before Mother Teresa of Calcutta. And I remember something she said that very strongly to her sisters, because we talk about distractions. She talked about how, as they started to get more popular and more well-known, there were so many different organizations, world leaders, that were trying to offer so many distractions for their work, trying to pull them in so many different directions. And she said very poignantly to her sisters on serving the poor, she goes, we are not, first and foremost, social workers. We are not humanitarians. And just, she didn't say this part. She wasn't saying that social work is bad.
Right.
She finished it by saying to her sister, she goes, we do what we do because we're compelled by the love of Christ. Simple, end of story. Absolutely. That's why we do what we do. And we cannot forget that. With what you were saying, I found that very, very powerful.
Well, and he closes out the letter talking about how there are leaders who claim the name of Christ who will say, you need to adhere to my brand of Christianity because it will achieve X, and nothing else will achieve that. And he shows us, it points out, in other words, God won't be mocked. He won't be used as a pawn, or just as a means to an end. And when you start getting that kind of a distraction, you begin to believe Christianity, or to use Christianity not because it's true, but because of what it can do for you, and that you become manipulative there, and you lose that focus that as Mother Teresa pointed out, we're not social workers primarily. That doesn't mean we don't do social work. It doesn't mean that we don't strive to make the world a truly just and fair place. But that can't be the primary goal. Jesus says that in a couple of different places, parable of the sheep and goats, etc., doing these things is the evidence that you belong to him. It's not how you belong to him. And we lose that focus on him as the provider of our salvation, when all we're doing is trying to use what he may or may not have said or believed or done in today's context as a means of achieving our own ends.
Definitely. And what and as we said, but what I really like about this letter is, at least find for myself, it really is challenging, I think, the reader, but myself, to really go a little deeper,
Mm-hmm.
look at especially those who follow this your channel, those who are following this series, and to really look at, assuming all those who are watching are desiring to go from good to better, especially those who find themselves believers in Christ, is, how is Screwtape? How is Wormwood trying to corrupt and pervert the good that I desire to do? And he's showing that, I think, in this letter. And I'm assuming, because we haven't read ahead, but remember, is how is he going to continue to show us that in the future letters?
Yep. Well, folks, I hope this has given you some food for thought, particularly in this contentious political season that we are entering here in the U.S. And God willing, we'll be back at you next week. Until then, light something you like. Enjoy this week.